Selfish dad gave my daughter a stick for her birthday and said expensive gifts are only for other grandkids. Everyone laughed, but 30 minutes later there was silence when I did something that would change our family forever. I always knew my father was selfish. It was evident in every interaction, every family gathering, every conversation. His world revolved exclusively around himself, with everyone else orbiting him like planets around a cruel sun. Growing up as his son was an exercise in constant disappointment and emotional neglect. But somehow, I had made peace with who he was, or at least, I thought I had. That was until my daughter Amanda's 10th birthday party, when he crossed a line I never imagined possible. That day changed everything, not just for my relationship with him, but for our entire family dynamic. Looking back, I realize it was the inevitable breaking point after years of accumulated resentment and pain. Amanda had been looking forward to her birthday for months. She'd created a meticulous wish list, complete with pictures cut from catalogs, a turquoise bike with streamers on the handlebars, premium art supplies, she was quite the little artist, and a Victorian-style dollhouse she'd been eyeing at the toy store downtown. Emily, my wife, and I had spent weeks planning the perfect celebration. Our modest suburban home was transformed with pink and purple balloons, streamers hanging from every doorway, and a handmade Happy Birthday Amanda banner that took Emily 3 evenings to complete. The morning of the party, Amanda woke up earlier than usual, bouncing on our bed with that infectious excitement only children can truly express. "Is it time for my party yet, Daddy?" she asked, her blue eyes wide with anticipation. "Not until noon, sweetie," I said, pulling her in for a hug. "But we've got plenty to do before then. Want to help Mom with the final decorations?" She nodded enthusiastically and raced downstairs, her blonde ponytail bouncing behind her. I watched her go with a smile, determined that nothing would spoil her special day. By noon, everything was ready. The 3-tiered birthday cake, chocolate with strawberry filling, Amanda's favorite, sat proudly on the dining table. Colorful gift bags and wrapped presents formed a small mountain in the corner of the living room. Our friends arrived first, then Emily's parents, who immediately gave Amanda a warm hug and presented her with a beautifully wrapped gift. "Don't open it yet, honey," Emily's mother said, kissing Amanda's cheek. "Save it for the gift opening ceremony." Amanda nodded seriously, carefully placing the present on the designated gift table. She was always good about following the rules, my little girl. Then my sister Laura arrived with her husband Greg and their twins, Sophia and Michael, both 12. Laura had always been our father's favorite, something she leveraged regularly, though she'd deny it if confronted. The twins immediately handed Amanda their gifts, store-bought cards with $20 bills tucked inside. Nothing special, but Amanda thanked them politely anyway. By 1 o'clock, the only ones missing were my parents. I checked my watch for the 5th time, trying not to let my irritation show. They were always late, a power move my father had perfected over the years. I had specifically asked them to arrive on time, knowing how important this was to Amanda, but of course, my wishes meant nothing to him. "Should we start without them?" Emily whispered, squeezing my arm gently. I was about to agree when the doorbell rang. Amanda rushed to answer it, excited to greet her grandparents. I followed closely behind, already preparing my face for the polite smile I'd have to wear throughout their visit. There they stood on our porch. My father, Howard, a tall man with steel gray hair and cold eyes that never quite smiled, even when his mouth did. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed the world owed him respect simply for existing. Beside him was my mother, Barbara, once vibrant and outspoken, now reduced to a quiet shadow in his presence. Years of emotional manipulation had hollowed her out, leaving behind a woman who rarely expressed her own opinions. "Grandpa!" "Grandma!" Amanda exclaimed, reaching out for a hug. My mother bent down to embrace her, but my father merely patted her head, the most affection he ever showed. It was then that I noticed he wasn't carrying any gift bags or wrapped packages. Instead, in his hand was what appeared to be a stick, a branch broken off from some tree, still bearing a few withered leaves at the end. Amanda noticed it too. "What's that, Grandpa?" she asked, pointing at the stick. My father's lips curved into what might have been a smile to anyone who didn't know him. To me, it looked more like a predator baring its teeth. "This," he announced loudly enough for everyone in the living room to hear, "is your birthday present." The room fell silent. Amanda stood frozen, her small face a picture of confusion. She looked at the stick, then back at my father, clearly trying to understand if this was some kind of joke or prelude to the real gift. I don't understand," she said quietly. My father thrust the stick toward her, forcing her to take it. "It's a special stick," he said, his voice dripping with false cheerfulness. "Expensive presents are only for other grandchildren. Then he laughed, a booming, self-satisfied sound that echoed through our home. Laura giggled uncomfortably, and Greg grinned as if my father had said something mildly amusing rather than deliberately cruel. Even some of our guests, those who didn't know my father well, chuckled politely, assuming this must be some inside joke or prelude to the actual gift. Amanda stood there, holding the stick awkwardly, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. She turned to look at me and Emily, silently asking what she had done wrong to deserve this humiliation. Emily immediately moved to her side, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Why is Grandpa saying that?" Amanda whispered, her voice trembling. I felt something snap inside me. A lifetime of swallowing my father's abuse, of making excuses for his behavior, of pretending everything was fine for the sake of family harmony, it all came crashing down in that single moment. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I said, my voice low but sharp. My father merely shrugged, completely unconcerned by the hurt he'd caused. "You don't deserve my respect, William, you know that. Why should I spend money on your daughter?" The laughter died instantly. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had laughed at something that wasn't a joke at all, but a deliberate act of cruelty against a child. I didn't explode, though every cell in my body wanted to. Instead, I took a deep breath and did something unexpected. I smiled. Then I walked across the room to the beautifully decorated cake table. I picked up the cake knife, causing a momentary intake of breath from everyone present. Not because they thought I would do something violent, I would never, but because they sensed something momentous was about to happen. With deliberate care, I cut 2 perfect slices of cake, placing them on small plates. I handed one to Amanda and one to Emily. Then I turned to face my father, the smile gone from my face. "You are no longer welcome here," I said, my voice calm but firm. What followed was the most profound silence I've ever experienced. Not the awkward kind that follows a social faux pas, not the uncomfortable kind that comes after an argument, but a deep, unsettling silence that seemed to seep into the walls themselves. It was the sound of something permanent changing, of relationships being irrevocably altered. For 30 minutes, no one spoke. My father sat in an armchair, arms crossed over his chest, his initial smirk gradually fading as he realized no one was rushing to his defense. My mother remained silent beside him, staring down at her lap, her hands nervously twisting her purse strap. Laura avoided eye contact with everyone, especially me. The other guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unsure whose side they should take in this unexpected family drama. Amanda sat next to Emily on the sofa, picking at her cake with small, shaky bites. She wasn't crying anymore, but the joy had been sucked out of her special day. That broke my heart more than anything else. As the silence stretched on, I could see my father growing increasingly uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being the villain in any story. In his narrative, he was always the hero, the patriarch, the one whose opinions mattered most. But now, surrounded by witnesses to his cruelty, he couldn't control the story anymore. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he scoffed and broke the silence. "Are you serious, William?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "Over a joke?" I kept my voice deliberately calm. "You humiliated my daughter on her birthday in front of everyone. It wasn't a joke." He rolled his eyes like a teenager. "Oh please, she's 10. She'll forget it in a week." That's when Amanda looked up from her barely touched cake. "No, I won't," she said quietly. Something flickered across my father's face, perhaps a momentary realization of what he'd done, a flash of doubt or even shame. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come, replaced by his usual arrogance. "Jesus," he muttered, "this family has gone soft." That was it. The final straw. I stood up, my decision made. "Get out," I said. He let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You're kicking me out? Your own father, because I didn't spend money on your brat?" Emily stood up too, her face flushed with anger. "Yes, leave now." The tension in the room was unbearable. My mother finally raised her head and looked between us, her lips pressed together in a thin line. She seemed like she wanted to say something, but decades of submission to my father had robbed her of her voice. Laura scoffed from across the room. "Oh, come on, Dad was just..." I cut her off, my patience finally exhausted. "You think that's okay? You think it's okay that he treats Amanda like garbage while your kids get everything?" She shrugged, defensive now. "Maybe if you weren't so..." "You know what?" I interrupted again. "I'm done pretending. Let's just come clean. Dad never respected me, and that's okay. He's always favored you and your children, fine. But I'm done letting Amanda feel like she's less than. It stops today." My father shook his head and pushed his chair back, preparing to stand. Unbelievable, the victim complex on you. I took a step closer to him. Victim complex? You walked into my daughter's birthday party and gave her a goddamn stick while laughing about how you only buy presents for Laura's kids. That's not a joke, that's you being a selfish, bitter old man. For perhaps the first time in his life, my father had no immediate comeback. He just stood there, jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides. I turned to my mother. And you? Are you just going to sit there and let him do this? She hesitated, visibly torn between her husband and her son. Then, in a voice quieter than I expected, she said, I didn't know he was going to do that. That simple statement shifted the energy in the room once again. My father turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Excuse me? She cleared her throat and straightened in her seat, a small act of defiance that I'd rarely seen from her. I knew he preferred Laura's children, but I didn't know it would go this far. My father stared at her as if she'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Oh, don't start. But for once, my mother wasn't finished. William's right. It wasn't a joke, it was cruel. Laura's mouth dropped open. Mom. My mother sighed and said slowly, we should go. My father laughed again, but it was a hollow sound now, lacking his usual confidence. You're actually on his side? She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. She just picked up her purse and stood, avoiding his gaze. For the first time in my life, I saw my father truly speechless, and that was only the beginning. I didn't give my father time to argue or regain his footing. Both of you, get out now. My mother didn't resist. She gave Amanda one last look, something almost apologetic in her eyes, then turned and headed for the door. My father, on the other hand, lingered, looking around the room as if expecting someone to back him up. When no one did, his face twisted in disgust. You're a joke, William, he spat. A weak little, out, I said again, my voice cold. He let out a dry laugh and shook his head. Fine, but don't come crawling back when you realize you can't cut me out of your life. I opened the front door without saying another word. My mother stepped out first, and he followed. But just before crossing the threshold, he turned back to look at Laura. Are you coming? He asked, clearly expecting her support. Laura hesitated. She looked at me, then at Emily, then at Amanda, who was still clutching the stupid stick as if she didn't know what to do with it. Then she sighed and stood up. Yeah, I'm coming. Of course she was. She'd always chosen his side, knowing it came with benefits. She grabbed her husband's arm, and the two of them followed my parents out, taking the twins with them. The door closed behind them with a finality that felt oddly satisfying. For a few seconds, no one moved. The remaining guests were frozen, waiting for some cue as to what they should do next. There was nothing to say, nothing that could repair the damage that had been done. Then Amanda broke down. She burst into tears and buried her face against Emily's side. Emily knelt down, whispered soft reassurances, and gently rubbed her back. I crouched down beside them and put a hand on Amanda's shoulder. Honey, I said gently, it's okay. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Why does Grandpa hate me? Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. I clenched my fists, forcing my voice to remain calm. He doesn't hate you, sweetheart. He doesn't know how to be a good person. She sniffled. But he's nice to Sophia and Michael. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I know, honey, and it's not fair. But listen to me, we love you more than anything in the world. You don't need him to be happy. She wiped her nose on her sleeve. But my party is ruined. And that part hurt the most, because she was right. The air in the room was heavy with tension. No one was laughing or celebrating anymore. The guests began making quiet excuses to leave, murmuring awkward apologies and promises to call later. The birthday party that was supposed to be perfect had turned into a disaster. The candles had melted, the presents remained unopened, and the joy had been sucked out of the day. Emily and I did our best to salvage what we could. We put on Amanda's favorite movie, ordered pizza, her favorite food, and sat together on the couch, trying to create a small bubble of normality amidst the chaos. Amanda tried to smile, tried to pretend she was okay, but I could see the hurt lingering in her eyes. As I watched her that evening, forcing brave smiles and thanking us for the gifts we'd bought her, I made a decision. This wasn't over. I wasn't going to let my father walk away from this thinking he had won, thinking he could humiliate my daughter and get away with it. No, I was going to make him regret it in ways he couldn't even imagine. He wanted to play cruel games? Fine. I'd play too, but I'd play smarter. Revenge was coming, and he wouldn't see it until it was too late. My father has always loved control. He built his entire identity around it, controlling my mother, controlling my sister, and most of all, trying to control me. There was a sick pleasure he took in watching people scramble to please him, in knowing he could make or break someone's day with just a word or gesture. But there was one thing he could never control, no matter how hard he tried: my business. I started it from nothing, working long hours, making endless sacrifices, pushing through every setback and disappointment. When it finally took off, a software company specializing in financial security systems, my father had the audacity to pretend he had something to do with its success. He never invested a dime, never offered useful advice, never lifted a finger to help. But the moment it became successful, suddenly he was walking around like a co-founder. He introduced me to people as if I worked under him. He called it our business even though his name wasn't on a single document. And the worst part? I let it slide for years because deep down, I thought if I made him feel important, maybe he'd finally respect me. Maybe he'd finally be proud. It was a mistake born of desperation for his approval, a child's hope carried into adulthood. After Amanda's birthday, I stopped letting things slide. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a shrewd, no-nonsense woman named Jessica who had helped me navigate several tough business deals. I need to make some changes, I told her. My father has been implying he has a stake in the company. He doesn't, but I want to make sure there's no possibility of him making any claims. Jessica was silent for a second. Are you sure? Your father isn't technically listed anywhere, but he's acting as a... He's nothing, I interrupted. He has no role, no position, no authority. Make it official. I want documentation stating explicitly that Howard Davidson has no connection to Davidson Systems whatsoever. Consider it done, she said without further questions. And just like that, I closed a door on my father that had been open for far too long. He didn't notice at first. He was too busy sulking, probably expecting me to come crawling back with an apology. But when his usual calls to my office went unanswered, when his name was systematically removed from everything he had pretended to be a part of, when the reception staff were instructed not to let him into the building without an appointment, then he began to realize something was wrong. The storm hit exactly 1 week after Amanda's birthday. He showed up at my office unannounced, brushing past my assistant as if he owned the place. I was in the middle of a conference call when he burst through my door. "William," he barked, his face already flushed with anger. "What the hell's going on?" I calmly asked my colleagues for 5 minutes, muted the call, and leaned back in my chair. "I don't know what you're talking about." His face reddened further. "I called the bank today, and they wouldn't give me any information about the company accounts. I called your board of directors, and suddenly I'm not welcome at their meetings. What the hell are you playing at?" I shrugged, enjoying his discomfort more than I probably should have. "You said I didn't deserve your respect, so why should you have any part of my business?" His jaw clenched. "I built this with you." I laughed, genuinely amused by his delusion. "No, Dad, I built this. You just like to pretend you did." "You ungrateful little..." "Careful," I warned, my amusement vanishing. "You're in my building, and I don't owe you anything." For the first time in his life, my father looked truly lost. I could see it in his eyes, the dawning realization that the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. He had spent years pretending to be a king, walking around with his chest puffed out, talking about his company, his influence, his success. Now it was gone. He had nothing. And the best part? He had done it to himself. He stepped closer to my desk, trying to reassert his dominance through physical presence. "You really think you can just cut me out?" "I already have." His breathing grew heavy, irregular. He looked at me as if he wanted to hit me, to yell, to do something, anything, to regain control. But there was nothing he could do. No leverage, no power. I could practically see his ego crumbling in real time. "You'll regret this," he said finally, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You need me." I smiled, feeling calmer than I had in years. "No, Dad, I never did." Then I pressed the security button on my desk. Security didn't even have to touch him. As soon as I pressed the button, 2 tall, broad-shouldered men appeared in my office doorway. My father took one look at them and seemed to shrink, suddenly aware of how pathetic he must have looked, an old man throwing a tantrum in a place where he had no authority. "Are you serious?" he hissed. I tilted my head, studying him as if he were a mildly interesting specimen. "You think you can come in here and make demands? This isn't your house, this isn't your business. You have no authority here, and you never did." He scoffed, shaking his head, but I could see his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He was unraveling, and we both knew it. You think you're untouchable, he muttered, more to himself than to me. But let me remind you, son, I'm still your father. You don't get to erase me just because you throw a tantrum. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in decades. I already did, and believe me, Dad, it feels great. The security guard stepped forward, and for a second, I thought my father might actually try to fight back. His fists clenched, his chest puffed out like a cornered animal preparing to strike. But then something unexpected happened. The office door opened again, and my mother walked in. I hadn't spoken to her since the party, and I certainly hadn't invited her to my office. Yet there she was, standing in the doorway, looking between me and my father with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Howard," she said quietly, addressing my father, "come with me." His eyes flickered to hers, anger momentarily giving way to confusion. "What are you doing here?" She took a deep breath, then looked at me. "William, can we talk alone?" I hesitated, then nodded to the guards. "Give us the room." They stepped out, closing the door behind them. Now it was just the three of us, an echo of countless family discussions that had always ended with my father getting his way and everyone else capitulating. But this time felt different. "Mom, whatever you're about to say," I began, but she held up a hand. "I know you're angry," she said, "and I don't blame you. What your father did was wrong. I should have stopped him a long time ago." My father's head snapped toward her. "Barbara, what the hell?" She ignored him, speaking directly to me. "But you have to listen to me." I crossed my arms. "Go ahead." She hesitated, then said something that left me speechless. "I'm getting out." I blinked, not understanding. "Out of what?" She swallowed hard, her hands twisting together nervously. Him. The life I've been trapped in for decades." My father's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" She turned to him, and for the first time in my life, I saw nothing but cold pity in her eyes when she looked at him. "Howard, I've spent my whole life keeping quiet, watching you play favorites, watching you tear William down because you can't stand that he's better than you." My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. It was as if his entire script had been taken away, leaving him stranded on stage without lines. My mother turned back to me. "I should have left a long time ago, but I was afraid of losing the house, of losing financial security, of starting over at my age." She took a deep breath. "But I'm not afraid anymore." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You're divorcing him?" She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "If you'll help me." My father slammed his fist on my desk. "Are you out of your mind?" She flinched, an ingrained response to his anger, but didn't back down. "No, Howard, I think I'm finally sane." He turned to me, his face contorted with pure rage. "This is your fault," he seethed. "You're poisoning her against me." I leaned back in my chair, oddly calm in the face of his fury. "No, Dad, you did that all by yourself." For the first time in his life, my father looked truly powerless, and it was beautiful. My father was shaking now, a faint tremor running through his body. His face, red with rage only moments before, had faded to an unhealthy pallor. He looked between my mother and me as if he couldn't believe what was happening. "You're serious?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're really leaving me?" My mother nodded, her hands steady at her sides. "Yes, Howard, I am." His breathing was uneven, almost desperate. "You're making a mistake. You think he will take care of you? You think William will save you?" He let out a bitter laugh. "News flash, Barbara, you walk out on me, you get nothing." I tilted my head, studying him with detached interest. "Are you sure about that?" He scoffed. "What the hell does that mean?" I leaned forward, tapping my fingers on the desk. "You never took care of the finances, Dad. You never bothered. Mom did. You just barked orders and assumed everything was under your control." His eyes darted to her. "Barbara." She looked at me, then back at him, and dropped the bombshell. "I've already spoken to the lawyers. Everything in my name is mine, half the house, half the savings, and considering how much I've endured over the years, I'm going after more." My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. He was a man watching his empire crumble before his eyes, powerless to stop it. I smiled, unable to resist twisting the knife a little deeper. "Oh, and since you like to pretend that my business was your business, I had my legal team do some digging. Turns out you took out loans in your name, assuming I'd cover them with company funds." His breath caught. "You. Guess what happens when those loans don't get paid?" I continued. "The bank doesn't come for me, they come for you." He stared at me, finally realizing how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. "You're lying," he muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. I sat back and crossed my arms. "Find out for yourself." He turned to my mother, desperation replacing anger. "Barbara, you can't do this to me." She looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw no fear in her eyes, no hesitation, just absolute clarity. "You did this to yourself, Howard." He stumbled back a step, gripping the edge of my desk as if he needed it to stay standing. You ungrateful." I cut him off. "No, Dad, that's who you are. You were given a family, and instead of loving us, you played favorites. You had a son who built something incredible, and instead of being proud, you tried to take credit. You had a wife who stood by you for years, and instead of appreciating her, you treated her like she was disposable." I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. "You lost everything, Dad, and you have no one to blame but yourself." The room fell silent. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say, no insults, no manipulation, no way to spin the situation to his advantage. He had truly lost. A chime from my phone broke the silence. I looked down at the screen to see a text from Emily. "Amanda's feeling better. We took her out for ice cream. She's smiling again." I exhaled, feeling the tension leave my body. That was all that mattered. Amanda was happy, safe, untouched by my father's poison. I looked back at him. "You should go." He stared at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, maybe regret, maybe hatred, maybe just the weight of realizing he had finally run out of people to manipulate. Without another word, he turned and walked out. My mother stayed a moment longer, looking at me with something like gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me that I still have a choice." Then she left too, following the path my father had taken, but for the first time in decades, walking as her own person. And just like that, my father was out of my life. I won't lie and say it didn't feel good, it did. It felt right, like taking off a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years without realizing how much it weighed me down. The following weeks brought significant changes. My mother filed for divorce, moving into a small apartment not far from our house. She started therapy, began reconnecting with old friends, and even took up painting, something she'd loved in college but had abandoned when she married my father. Laura called me multiple times, leaving increasingly angry voicemails about how I destroyed the family. I didn't bother returning her calls. She had made her choice, just as I had made mine. As for Amanda, the change in her was remarkable. Without my father's toxic presence, she blossomed. Emily and I made sure to throw her another birthday party, smaller, but filled with genuine love and laughter. We got her the bike she wanted, the art supplies, and yes, the dollhouse. Watching her unwrap them, her face lighting up with joy, I knew I had made the right decision. One evening, as Emily and I sat on the porch watching Amanda ride her new bike up and down the sidewalk, Emily took my hand. "You know, I've been waiting years for you to stand up to your father like that," she said quietly. I looked at her, surprised. "You never said anything." She smiled. "It wasn't my place to push you. You had to come to it on your own. But I'm proud of you, Will. What you did took courage." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her understanding and patience. "I just wish I'd done it sooner." "You did it when it mattered most," she said, nodding toward Amanda, who was attempting a wobbly turn at the end of the driveway. "You did it for her." And she was right. I hadn't taken revenge for revenge's sake. I did it to protect my daughter, to make sure she never had to feel like she was less than, that she would never have to go through another birthday feeling unloved or unworthy. As for my father, I heard through the grapevine that things weren't going well for him. The loans he'd taken out, expecting me to cover them, were coming due. The social standing he'd built on the back of my success was crumbling as word spread about what had happened. Even his golf buddies were starting to distance themselves, uncomfortable with the ugly truth that had been revealed. Did I feel sorry for him? Not really. He had spent a lifetime creating this situation, systematically alienating everyone who might have cared about him. His downfall wasn't my doing, it was the natural consequence of his own actions. 6 months after Amanda's birthday, I received a letter from him, not an apology, of course, but a thinly veiled attempt to re-establish contact, framed as concern for my mother's mental state. I didn't bother responding. A year later, my mother told me he had moved to Florida, living alone in a small condo. Laura still visited him occasionally, but even she was keeping her distance now that the flow of gifts and money had dried up. As for me, I had everything I needed: a thriving business, a loving wife, and most importantly, a daughter who now knew without a doubt that she was valued, protected, and loved unconditionally. And as I walked out of my office each evening to go home to my family, I knew one thing for certain: my father would never hurt us again. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes or public humiliation, it's simply living well, free from the toxic people who tried to diminish you. My father gave my daughter a stick for her birthday, but in doing so, he gave me something far more valuable: the clarity to finally break free. And that is a gift I will always be grateful for.